Hey guys, I'm going to take a few minutes to talk you through my journey as a teacher. So, I started out teaching in Alachua County Public Schools here in Gainesville. I taught there for about 7 years, mostly in fifth grade. And most of that time, even though I believe that learning should be student centered, my practice really said otherwise. It was really pretty teacher centered. About 10 years ago, I moved to PK Young, and I've been here ever since, also working in fourth and fifth grade. And it was in this time period of my career where I really started moving my practice a little bit more towards my beliefs and being student centered. But within that, I really struggled with figuring out how it's best to do that. And I became acquainted with the idea of self-regulated learning, and I wanted to learn more about that. And so I began working on my specialist in educational technology and curriculum instruction. And then I completed that, and I'm now working on my doctorate, obviously. And this whole time, I've really been looking hard at this idea of self-regulated learning and teaching students how to actually do that, how to give them the strategies to do that. So my journey in getting this far, one of the first things that happens in the program, and it really just hit me in the face, is this media and methods debate. And while other people have they've seen it and then they've just moved on to other things, this has really stuck with me about like, where do I really fit here and what do I feel about this? Because in my own practice, I found myself, as I started to reflect on it, that I really just wasn't paying attention to this. I would use technology a lot, but I didn't have thought behind it, and I didn't really know whether or not it was making a difference. And I started reading stuff by Clark, and at first it's like, no, this can't be true, but then you see it and it makes sense, and oh, it's really about pedagogy, and that really fits with my beliefs too. I really do think that pedagogy is the most important thing. But on the flip side, with Cosma's idea that you having everything so embedded that you can't take the technology out because it's part of the pedagogy, that also makes sense. And so I really struggled with like, where do I really land in this idea? And then also at the same time being hit in the face with our three friends, behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism. There are things I knew about. I had obviously read about and learned about my first go around getting my bachelor's and master's degree, but I hadn't really thought about them much since. When I started the program, I probably would have had a visceral reaction to behaviorism. I know there's a lot of teachers who are very behaviorist in their classroom practices, and that's never been me. It's what I grew up with, but I've always felt like it was too harsh and extrinsic motivation was used way too much. But at the same time, I never really thought of myself as a constructivist either. I always thought that that was kind of flowery, theoretical mumbo jumbo that just wasn't real in the real world. Like, right, if you, in an ideal world where kids could just learn whatever they wanted and construct whatever they wanted and take as long as they want to learn something, that's great, but that's not reality for most people. So I always kind of felt like I was somewhere in between, and that the cognitivist idea was really more my home. I do believe that I am more of a realist, objectivist, that there is something real outside of us. I don't really think everything is relative, kind of the constructivist philosophy. But I also think that it's really about what's going on inside your brain, not just what's measurable on the outside, which is the hallmark of behaviorism. And so these two things kind of came together for me, and really trying to figure out where people are. And I really do feel like Clark is kind of on the behaviorist side of things, and if you can't see it and you can't measure it, and therefore it doesn't exist. And Cosma's more on this cognitivist idea that it really is all built in there together and you can't really separate it. And so as I've grown in my understanding of that, I've been able to think more about my practice in terms of the self-regulated learning and like how all of this plays into teaching kids strategies to regulate their own learning. And I've really finally come down to this idea that I'm in the middle. I'm a pragmatist. This idea that we have to choose sides doesn't make sense to me. This is my favorite quote of anything we've read throughout the program. The paradigm issue has reached the status of utterly irrelevant. We should ignore theoretical issues and simply pick the methods that work reliably and efficiently to lead to student learning. I really do believe that. And I think you're going to have to pick some stuff from behaviorism and some stuff from cognitivism and some stuff from constructivism, just like I wrote about in my piece. I really feel like I wrote those three units as if they would be on their own, but they're really all one unit. That you're going to have times when students are going to construct their own knowledge, and you're going to have times when the teacher is leading that and as really the one who's figuring out the scope and sequence, but they're going to be really guiding students thinking. And then there's going to be other times when it's just like, you know what, we got to learn this. You got to know this down cold, and I'm going to do some extrinsic motivation to help you get there. I really do believe that needing to use all of those components when we're designing whatever instruction it is, including the strategy instruction. I also feel like this kind of came through in the two articles that I analyzed. Both of them were about the laptop stuff with Winchell and Shaw, and then the other one that came right behind it, like really trying to probe deeper about whether or not laptops made that difference. And I think that they all kind of came down a little bit on in the middle, but they were a little bit closer to Clark in the idea that it's really about the pedagogy. But what they were really focusing on was the idea of like, well, if the laptops are ubiquitous, then they become part of it. And you can't really take them out. They're trying to see if like laptops actually make a difference in how students learn. And yes, maybe they do, maybe they don't. But the reality is the laptops are going to be there. So instead of like talking about whether the laptops are the difference, let's talk about the pedagogy. And so as I move forward and try to think about regulated learning in the pedagogy, I want to think about what are the best ways to actually teach students the strategies to regulate their learning. So just as a little bit of a summation, so regulated learning goes in this cycle. This is really Zimmerman's conceptual framework, starting with forethought, performance, and reflection. Forethought being goal setting, this is what I want to do. Performance being actually doing it and monitoring your performance, and then obviously reflection is how did I do. But I also, as I'm going through the research, realizing that self-efficacy is a huge part of goal setting, because if you don't feel like you can do something, you won't set the goal to do it. But if you feel like I can accomplish that, then you set the goal and then you actually accomplish it, and it becomes a positive spiral. Within performance, I really started focusing on the help-seeking behaviors, because that's really where you're starting to teach kids the strategies to go outside themselves. Like, this is the part I know how to do, good, I'm great there, but this is the part I don't know how to do, how do I get help? And there's actual strategies that you can teach students there. And then in reflection, one of the things that I got from Nichols and Huber was this idea that you've got to be able to give them some stems, some thinking questions around their reflection. If you do that, then the reflection becomes more usable. And then the other thing that you have to remember about regulation of learning is that it could really happen in all of these domains: cognitive, motivational, and behavioral. So which one are you really going to focus on? For me, I've decided that most of my work is really going to focus in the cognitive domain. That's really where I'm going to be in what I'm wanting to find out. So that leads me to my question. In what ways do teachers adapt their practice to support student regulation of learning in the presence of technology? In other words, teachers are using technology in their classroom. How is the technology helping the teacher support those kids? Or is it helping them support the kids? And that's really what I'm wanting to find out. What are the ways that technology allows the student regulation of learning that would not be able to happen if the technology wasn't there? Because a lot of self-regulated learning, or even just peer-regulated or co-regulated learning, there has to be a lot of student ownership, which means that the students have to be in control of a lot of the pieces, which means the teachers have to be able to monitor a lot of different stuff. And if the teachers can't monitor all of that, then they're not going to do it. And so how does technology allow the teachers to monitor all of those different pieces? That's really what I want to look at, because that pulls it back to Cosma of like, you can't pull the technology out. So the context, I don't know the total context of my new situation, but I do know that there's a K4 science specialist, and I'm pretty comfortable with what goes on in his room, and I want to focus in on the 4th grade science project. What the kids do is they choose a topic that they want to research, and they research that topic, any topic they want. Then they create a proposal for how they're going to actually do an experiment. And that proposal is from soup to nuts. Like, this is all the things I need to know. These are the things that I need to have purchased in order to set up the experiment. Everything needs to be part of it. Then they set up and conduct the experiment. They report on the results, and then they have to get feedback from an outside expert. And then they have to incorporate that in their final report. And there's technology interwoven in a lot of those different places. Now, how does that look as far as my conceptual framework? Well, here's the cycle. Self-efficacy is the goal setting. The forethought phase, help-seeking behaviors, is in the performance phase, and self-evaluation is in the reflection phase. So self-efficacy, their social emotional learning. I need to look at the core at the school and how that affects how students feel about their ability to set goals, or what their ability to accomplish work, which then affects their ability to set goals. Then the help-seeking behaviors in the performance phase, they're going to be doing their project work. They're going to be using PBWorks and Google Apps to complete that. And you're also looking at their help-seeking behaviors. So advantageous help-seeking behaviors, you need help and you get it appropriately, you seek it out appropriately. Or detrimental help-seeking behaviors, you need help but you don't seek it, or you don't need help but you seek it anyway. That last one's kind of tricky, but I want to look at what the kids are actually doing and what are some strategies we can use to support that. And then at the end, of course, the self-evaluation and the questions, the reflection questions to help them make that happen. And so you can see technology as a key component to a couple parts to keep make sure that the teacher is able to track what's going on. But ultimately, we're looking at how do these different pieces all work together to help students learn how to regulate their own learning.